We are live. I'm so happy that people are coming on to join us for this special edition of Have You Ever Heard with the incomparable Rhiannon, um, hero of mine for a long time. And it's good to have you here.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And
Well, I'm still here where I'm here, and you're there where you're there.
it's the only way we meet anymore. Uh,
That's right.
but we're going to be discussing this classic album, this great album, uh, 1979, and
Mhm.
I'm just gonna look and see if people are coming on so that we're not jumping ahead too much before people are with us. I'm guessing so. All right. So I want to talk a little bit. Let's do this since we're waiting for people to come on. How are you in the pandemic?
Well, uh, Jan, my partner, and I bought a 9-acre farm in Hawaii 12 years ago and moved from California, where I never expected to leave.
Hmm.
And we've got this farm. We're growing a lot of food. We're out of the mainland. We're over here feeling really grateful to be on a farm with some young people who are working with us on the farm. And I'm teaching a bunch of classes on Zoom, so keeping the music flowing.
Yes,
And of course, always staying in touch with what's going on in the mainland because we're all in this together.
that's right. That's right. And music it's interesting to think about. I've heard a lot of conversation, particularly here in Nashville, because singers everywhere, and, something that can be exacerbated by singing, live singing, people together. So it's an interesting energy to navigate.
Yes, it is. Well, I was afraid that the latency on Zoom would make singing classes just a horror of frustration. And in fact, it's not the case.
Really?
It just means that all of us have to put on our like improvisational brains and think how to adjust certain ideas so that we can go on singing. And in fact, there are lots of ways to sing in collaboration. It's not nearly frustrating. What it is trying to make sure we keep the humanity in the
Mm,
sessions, making sure people are really saying what they're feeling inside their rectangle,
yes,
and just to keep the whole thing really personal and alive. And there's a lot of music that can be made. In some places, people are starting to find ways to make music out in fields and some places in big rooms with a lot of separation. So you can't keep the music down.
that's right. That's right. Well, and this is, I started this series actually in the pandemic, largely for that reason. I said, well, this is a great time. Most of us are at home.
Mhm.
And what a great time to remember music or introduce music that perhaps people may not be aware of or have ever heard, or to remind them um, of music that they love that they haven't listened to in a long time.
Yeah.
And so this is how this emerged, was in a sort of response to this.
That's great. You're such a champion of women in music and music in general. I really appreciate it, Tim. Really.
Well, well, thank you for that. I mean, Ray and I mean, we talked a few weeks ago, he and I, about Meg Christian's Turning It Over record, which is one of our favorites and one of the reasons you know, we found each other in a sense, because women's music really did bring us together in a sense, because it was hard to find music that represented our values.
Hmm.
And so when I heard for the first time women's music before I'd met Ray, I said, oh my God, this is music that talks about really what I believe and what I feel,
Yeah.
the way I wish the world was. And so I mean, I was really fascinated. I was rereading an interview you did with Hotwire about your early find, how you found women's music ultimately. And I mean, really, in some sense, we could say, I don't want to speak for you. So I just want to, my perception from the interview was that Alive might not have happened. Maybe it would have, but Alive might not have happened had women's music not provided the womb that it did, for you all to find each other.
Definitely. Um, Here's a little sort of backstory of it. In 1975, I went to the National Women's Music Festival when it was in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. And I also went to the first Michigan Women's Music Festival later in the summer. I got rides with the women I didn't even know. I just put a sign on a board, and so I kind of hitchhiked back and forth from California to those two festivals, which was very powerful, the women I met on those trips. And what I discovered at the festivals was all these women writing songs and making music and playing together and being really generous and accepting. And there wasn't anybody singing jazz or scat singing or improvising.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, maybe there's a place for me there. So I went home with the idea of finding some other people. In fact, Ginny Clemens, I'm sure you know who Ginny
Mm-hmm.
Clemens is. She said to me at the National Festival, okay, Rhiannon, if you can go home and create a jazz women's ensemble, I'll make sure you get in these festivals next year.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
and she did. So I went home and I went to a workshop for women in jazz. I think when I saw the sign on the board, I thought, well, that's exactly what I need. So I
Yes.
went to a kind of little dingy storefront in the Haight Ashbury and went in and went down the stairs to the lower level. And there was this extraordinary woman leading a workshop for women in jazz. Michelle Rosewoman was her name,
Yes.
avant-garde jazz player. And the only two other women who came were Carolyn Brandy and Suzanne DiVincenzo. So the three of us played together during the evening, and I was playing piano at the time. So I played and sang, and uh, at the end of the session, the three of us, agreed to meet on our own, and we just started the band. We were so eager to
Wow.
begin. We were like shot out of a cannon.
Mm-hmm.
We
Wow.
found our name Alive the first day. Somebody said it, and we went, "That's it!"
Wow.
And so it was really a fated kind of feeling. And the
Wow.
three of us went back to those festivals the next year. And then we started to realize it was better if I was just singing. My piano playing wasn't as strong as my singing. So we hired Janet Small on piano and Barbara Borden on drums. And then we were a quintet, and we were really ready to go. Piano, um, cello and bass, Suzanne, percussion, Carolyn, drum set, no, percussion, Carolyn, drum set, Barbara, and then
Okay.
me singing. So we were really ready to go, and so go we did. That photograph was by Irene Young,
Yes.
and it was taken in a motel room outside of the Michigan Women's Music Festival. She draped,
Really?
she draped a backdrop, and
Wow.
we moved the furniture against the walls, turned the bed on its side to make room. And,
Wow.
and she took that photograph, which looks very studio-ish,
It
and we're
does.
this tiny motel room.
Wow.
Funky.
Wow. So you performed then in 76 at the festivals for the first time. So you worked for 3 years ultimately before this record came out
We
together.
did. We did. We really had a lot. Well, we had to find the money.
There's that.
We had to really gather ourselves into the song shapes because we came together as women who wanted to improvise, women who wanted to write our own music in the jazz genre, but we didn't want to just do covers of other songs, which is really a jazz kind of format, a very honored jazz
Yes.
format.
Yes.
But we were feeling like, the lyrics were usually not what we wanted them to be, and we really wanted to write our own stuff. And everybody had song ideas. We weren't lacking for song ideas. So we met once a week, usually for much of the day. And we just began to gather material, and then we would hone it down. I believe we played our first gig in San Francisco at one of the women's places, and we just had two songs. That's all we had. So
Wow.
we just built ourselves, I think, really in demand of the situation. The women's music scene really wanted to represent women in music, which means a lot of genres, a lot of musical ideas and skills, a lot of kind of ensembles. And and I think that the women who made bands that made all women ensembles were always a little bit underrepresented. It takes
Hmm.
so much to get an ensemble to work.
Yes.
And the women's ensembles of the women's music, I found them all so inspiring. Bibi Kirosh was a kind of rock
Yes.
ensemble, and there were big bands. There were several big bands coming from different parts of the country. There was a lot of desire to play together. I mean, really, why would a bunch of women only want to be singing and playing guitar alone? The idea of this was very collaborative, of the whole women's scene. We were learning how to trust each other, how to share ideas, how to collaborate, how not to have one person be the leader, but really have a group-led ensemble.
Hmm.
And Alive was beautiful that way. We're friends for life.
How did, in those years, as you were honing material and writing material, this is a two-pronged question, um, in a sense. We have new dogs, so
Yeah, yeah. What are you gonna do?
um, but the first part of that is in coming up with material as you were writing these songs. Um, where were you drawing inspiration from? Because there's an interesting synergy between your writings. So when I look at the Rhiannon compositions on the record and I look at the Carolyn Brandy compositions on the record, there's this interwovenness, distinct voices, but there's a commonality of voice between the
Yeah.
two writers.
Well, everybody wrote. Some people had more material in there. Janet Small was also a very strong writer in the band. We
Yes.
just were coming from different places, but we had this love of jazz, which for us, I believe, was embedded in the history of jazz, jazz being a music from African American people and a music of freedom, a music designed to express freedom. So,
Yes.
of course, it would have improvisation in it. So, I was coming out of several years of learning jazz standards, singing them with bands, and just working in the kind of jazz scene in San Francisco. I was really engaged with that. Carolyn was coming from Seattle, where she was often the only woman in the squares or the Pike Street Market
Mhm.
playing congas with all the guys. She just felt it like home, that
Mm.
kind of drumming, and she began to study where it came from and all the background that makes it whole. And she was also a violin player growing up. So she would sometimes play violin, and she very often played congas, and she had developed a whole percussion set of all different kind of instruments, colors. Carolyn was a lot about color and not only rhythm, but color.
Mhm.
And Janet was a jazz player, but she had been writing for a while. She had a lot of her own material, and she also listened to a lot of classical music.
Okay.
So her pieces were really maybe the most elaborate of the writings that we had. She was the most schooled on the big 88 key instrument. So she had a lot of chord structure and chord progression understanding. So we would help each other. And what we learned was that was our biggest gift, is that we have these different kind of songs. And we had to trust one another to bring the material in quite fully shaped. And then everybody else would add their instruments, and then we would arrange together.
Wow.
And Barbara also wrote, and Suzanne also wrote.
Okay. Wow. What was so was there, let me ask this, and because I know today a huge challenge for many people, and maybe it's always been the challenge, but is introducing new material to audiences because they don't know it. And people are so accustomed in many ways to just hearing things they know and connecting that way. What I love about women's music in particular is that women's music was almost all original, all new. What was introducing this music and these songs to new audiences? What was the energy of that? How did that, what did you receive from audiences as they heard this material?
You know, I'd have to say, we were so on fire to write this music. I think, in a way, the audiences were frosting on the cake of the creativity. We just longed to play.
Wow.
And the fact that there was this whole network of places where we could go, we would drive first in an Econoline van that we built Suzanne DiVincenzo was also a carpenter and electrician. So we built a bed in the back of the van so we could stow all our gear, and somebody or two could lay on the top of it. So we would drive from California and maybe wouldn't stop until Chicago.
Wow.
And then in a few years, we got a 26-foot RV. So then we could cook for each other. Wow. We had our own bathroom. We had beds. We could really travel and stop, and it was a much more humane thing. So we would tour for several months at a time and just not go home. It was too damn far to go home, and we were not flying anywhere. We were on the road. Gasoline was cheaper. It was just much better. So we would go to the places, and we were so grateful to play for other people because they gave us feedback. I think the women were so hungry to hear other women play, so excited, so enthusiastic. And they might have understood some music more than others. I think ours was sometimes a little more to handle, but there was a kind of support your music sister vibe that we just did the best we could. And because we had some songs that were ballads. Mm-hmm. We had some songs that were really up-tempo and had a lot of lyrics, like City Life. We had some things that Carolyn was bringing that, like Yemaya, which is the Yoruban goddess of the ocean. So we're coming from very rooted Afro-Cuban rhythms and deity of the Yoruba religion. So people had to well, Yemaya, well, okay. But we needed to play so much, and the women were so responsive. I think it was a long time before we even thought about that, Tim.
Wow.
And there were so many gigs, there were people booking them, and there were, you could go on a tour entirely in the women's community.
Right.
All around the country. So then, somewhere in there, we started realizing we needed to assert ourselves into the jazz community because that was really the music that we were coming from. We wanted to be heard there to see if it stood up. Mm-hmm. So about that time, we took on a manager from New York who was Bill Evans' manager. She was Paquito de Rivera's manager. She was like legit in the jazz world. And I remember her saying to us, "Oh, gals, you're wonderful. We're going to be having fur coats on everybody next year." So, because she just thought, well, they're playing great music, it'll go.
Hmm.
And the fact is, it was very much a glass ceiling in that situation. And I think it was very disappointing for her that she couldn't book us in the way she had booked Bill Evans and Paquito de Rivera and the others. And she produced the second two albums that we made. And it was then that we started realizing, okay, we need to operate in the jazz world, we need to operate in the women's music world, and that was really a really great suggestion because there were hard things about both of them. The
Hmm.
women's music sometimes didn't pay very much, and they might not really know quite how to handle us as we got going and the music got more complex, and some pieces were very uh, avant-garde. There were these
Yes.
cello solos in the middle of things and voices that were speaking in other languages. And so, and then in the jazz world, that was like, yeah, yeah, good, good. But then they would want to know, why weren't there any men in the band? Why weren't there any men in the band? We would spend a good half of interviews trying to answer that question instead of
Wow.
answering questions about the music. It was frustrating. And so it was not particularly easy to navigate those two worlds, but that was what we bought in for.
Right.
And we would go on these trips in our RV, and now we were in one big vehicle. Everyone was comfy, and we would write music on the road, and we would be able to practice on the road, electronic keyboards and all of that, acoustic bass. So we could practice on the road, and we had tremendous conversations about the music and how we got there. There was even a period where the women were questioning, why are five white women playing jazz?
Right. Right.
So we spent one long trip across the country. Everybody just went to their part of the RV, and each of us wrote how we ended up loving jazz, what it meant to us to be in that realm. And by the time we finished, I think we all felt clear that we each came from different traditions, and somehow our lives had brought us toward that improvising music. And it was no longer possible for me to go and sing only Norwegian music.
Right.
That was not going to do it. But it did teach me to go back to Norwegian music and listen to how varied and interesting Norwegian music is
Hmm.
because of its enormous coastline and
Hmm.
all the people who came there from other parts of the world. So there was something good about it, but I did feel like we were having to prove ourselves 6 ways to Sunday.
Yes.
And, you know, that was a learning. That was really a learning. So that when someone asked us about it, we could really speak about it. We wrote kind of a dissertation together.
Yes. Well, and this is, I mean, and again, we're going to get to the album, I promise. But this is what is so fascinating about women's culture in particular, because there's such an intention behind the art that got generated. And it did require that kind of analysis going into it.
Hmm.
And so I don't know that you find that kind of analysis in popular music. Maybe you do. I feel like that analysis many times in pop comes afterwards, uh,
Hmm.
and not so much on the front end. And so much of what I've observed from women's culture was, okay, we're going to do this, and this is why, and this is the history behind it. And so it makes me love the music even more because I know how girded it is, if that's the right word.
Well, that's beautiful, Tim. I mean, the fact is, we would go into the room, say we were bringing in 3 new ideas at that rehearsal. We would go into the room, and any creative person will know what I'm saying when I say you can bring in a plan, you can bring in some chord changes, you can bring in lyrics, you can even bring in a feeling that you think you want the song to have, and then really the angels take over from there. The
Yes.
inspiration takes over from there. And if you don't let it take over, then you've missed part of the journey. And that's what we loved about each other is I'd say I'd bring in my idea and we'd kind of get going and I would hear their interpretations of what I would do, what I was doing. And I'd think, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Let's explore that further. So the song would end up having a really collaborative quality and would end up richer than I might have written in the beginning.
Mhm.
So I don't know about pop music. I wouldn't dare to speculate in any other kind of music, but I feel like anybody who's trying to be creative, anybody who's approaching a blank canvas, or anybody who has a couple of characters in their mind and they want to write a novel, or
Yeah.
anybody who's got a choreographic idea, the idea is not to know where you're going to end up. I think the idea is to get in there and just have at it, because the end result has a mystery to it
Yeah.
that's really important.
So having said all of that, how did you know it's time to make a record? And B, these are the songs we're going to do when it came time to make this first collective work?
Well, one of the women's labels uh, put up the money for us, Kay Gardner's label. And I can't remember anymore. It's so long. What's the label's name?
Gardner. If you haven't ever listened to Kay Gardner, you should. She's amazing.
Extraordinary.
Urana Records. Urana.
Yeah. So that was our first record, was on that label. They were out of Maine, and we went out there and met with them. So then we had the money, we had a label. And then Althea Waits, who is a black pianist from LA, we had met her, oh my God. I can't remember. It was through some women's music situation. Either she was at one of the festivals, or we somehow met her as women in music.
Okay.
And she was a really brilliant, I can still see her hands on the keyboard. She was a classical player, but also a jazz player. And she understood both of those formats, and she wrote a lot of original music. And she was so kind to us. So it was with her. She produced. So it was with her that we chose the song. We played a bunch of songs for her, and we started arranging them together. Then we found a studio in San Francisco that we could afford, and that we recorded it the way jazz players recorded. We did it all live. There were
Yes.
no overdubs.
Yes.
It was an extraordinary adventure for a bunch of young players on a first album. But that's what we had the money for, and that's what we wanted to do.
Was this anyone's, was it your first time in a studio recording music or?
I bet.
Okay.
I kind of think so. I would say that's the case for everybody. If anybody was on a recording, it was certainly as a guest on somebody else's album. But we were all in I was in my mid 30s, and I'm the oldest, and so it kind of went down from there into early 30s. But harder for women to get on a recording in those times. So
Yes.
we were so enthusiastic. So then here's the thing. Althea, I think on the second to the last day, or the last day, Althea had to leave. She had a medical emergency with family in LA, and she said, I am oh so sorry, I've got to go. And so she left, and we had to finish producing and taking care of the details. We had an engineer, but it really threw us into the driver's seat very early on.
Wow.
Yeah. And then we put out the album with Irene's photograph, which is such a brilliant photograph. It's so alive.
It is.
And in those days, people really bought albums. They just bought them like hotcakes at the women's festivals and at our gigs. You would just sell them, just bam, 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 bam.
Wow.
And they had all the lyrics on the back and lots
Oh,
of liner notes.
yeah.
And
Beautiful package.
yeah,
So people can see there's Althea.
there's Althea.
Althea.
And
Uh,
Betsy, who's from the label, and Barbara Edwards, who was our manager.
okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Show everybody. Well, and let's say for history's sake, recorded September 5th, 6th, and 7th, 1979 at
Yep.
Coast
So
Recording.
I would say Althea was gone the last day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, and you answered one of my questions about the record in the beginning of our conversation, because I was going to ask about the first song, Somebody's Talking to You, written by Michelle Rosewoman,
Hmm.
who we also heard on Meg's Face the Music. She
Really?
wrote Face the Music.
I didn't even
No,
know that.
no, she didn't. Hold on, let me double check myself. But I believe she wrote, yes, she wrote Face the Music.
Well, Michelle was, she was really in it for the women.
Mm.
But she was an avant-garde jazz artist, and she came to Michigan. She played at Michigan one year, but she needed to be in New York. That's where she ended up. She just needed to be where she could go as far out as she wanted to. And
Her
yeah,
albums are brilliant. Her albums are
yeah,
brilliant.
very, very amazing. Yeah. I think she's still in New York.
Is she?
And I wanted to say on that album, you'll notice there's a beautiful poem that Carolyn wrote. Carolyn was really
Yes.
well known for her poems, and it was really the anthem of Alive. We've written that many times. Maybe you would say the words.
What shall we say? When you ask where the music comes from, it comes from us all. It comes from us all. We bring ourselves to it and through it, and if we are honest, it comes from the heart. And we thank all of those who went before us. We believe in the revolutionary and spiritual power of music, the women of Alive.
There you go. Those are most of those are lyrics from one of Janet's songs
Okay.
called "We." What shall we say when you ask where the music comes from? Beautiful song about the origin of a lot of different world music. Wow, I didn't know that Janet had those lyrics at that point. She often wrote poems too that would sit there until she had a song for them.
Okay.
The
Well,
revolutionary and spiritual power of music. Oh, yeah.
yes. Well, and this album is from start to finish. It's so interesting because it's like a journey. Because it starts with somebody's talking to you, which is the voice is getting you to look inward. And then that's what your poem, Rhiannon, the self-titled poem, really talks about. It's about going inward in many ways. And part of me changes. And then it morphs midway through. And Spirit Healer, of course, is like this global,
Yeah.
and we'll go back a little bit, but then you hit City Life and it's like the reality, the
Yeah.
world,
Yeah.
what the world is. And then you get immediately hit with Dark Side of the Moon and Yamaha, and it's back inside again. So it's like this recognition that we have to start here, go into the world to live, of course, but come back to
Well,
this.
that is just brilliant, Tim. I don't think we had all of that when we were sequencing. But sequencing in albums is really a beautiful job figuring out how to put it. And like Dark Side of the Moon, Carolyn with these dreamy, beautiful pieces. And then isn't Yemaya on that album?
Yep, it comes right after Dark Side of the Moon. Yes.
Yeah. So then we'd go from Dark Side of the Moon to yeah, 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 Maya, yeah, Maya. Yeah.
Yeah.
We asked a lot of people.
We
people had
asked
to
about,
really people had to go on the ride with us.
yes, yes, yes. I got you. Yes, I understand. What was your, because you're also, I mean, now today, and I want to make sure we do this too. Rhiannon is a master improviser. Nobody improvises like Rhiannon. And she's got a book called Vocal River that I highly recommend. This is a well. This book is a well, and I come back to it regularly for inspiration and um, information and tips and reminders to come back inside. So I
Okay.
highly recommend this. You can get this at rhiannonmusic.com. Um, highly recommended. But we get like these glimmers of that on this record of the improvisation because of how the music, particularly, your poem, Part of Me Changes as well. It's this movement.
Hmm.
And so talk about, if you don't mind, where, I think I know, but where those seeds sprang from and how you grew that as a performer and writer.
Well, I sang all the time growing up. Bless my parents for giving me piano lessons and voice lessons. But that was in a kind of a classical and reading the chart, I mean, reading the notes on the page kind
Mm-hmm.
of study. Then I went off to college and I got really interested in the theater
Mm.
because those were the most fun people. They were always making things up and speaking in accents and carrying on and doing things with their bodies. And so it was a great place to hang out. And the music, I had come to a kind of dead end with where to go. I was at the University of Nebraska at that point.
Okay.
And then I moved to the East Coast and I started going to jazz clubs. And in the jazz clubs, I started hearing jazz, but I had no notion that I could do that. I was in awe of this improvising. But I was learning improvising in theater. In order to develop characters, you've got to write a story about them, their history. You've got to make things up. You've got to make the performance new and fresh every night. So I'm already thinking improvising. I would say my dad was the first improviser I ever met. He was a farmer.
Really?
And if you're a farmer, you're an improviser. That's that. You got to be
Yes.
able to heal the cows, plant the corn on the right day, fix the machines, watch the sky, etc. So I think improvising came into me very, very early. It kind of suits my nature. And then step by step, I just got turning more and more toward it. So the theater definitely turned me more toward it. And then when I went into jazz clubs and heard these excellent players, I thought, what are they doing that? How are they doing that? How do they know where the top of the tune is? They can't pop. They know where the top of the tune is. So I just got really deeply interested in it. And I was hanging out with a lot of improvisers in San Francisco at that point. We were all improvising. We were all hanging out together. Theater people, musicians, photographers, painters, and we would do forms where everybody could participate, and it was all improvised. It was all about invention. So, I was lucky enough to live in the Bay Area in the 70s.
Mm.
That was prime time. Improvisation was part of your skill set if you were an artist.
Yes.
And then here comes jazz. And so I switched into jazz. And then I'm learning improvising over form,
Mhm.
chord progressions that actually hold you in a shape, but you can still improvise and invent things over that shape, which was really beautiful to me because I love form, I love songwriting, but it really helped me to understand form and then go free, form, go free. And you really, if you're going to compose, then I think both of those skills are very important. Being able to improvise to find your ideas and then being able to put it in some kind of form. It's just that for me, the improvising won. After a while, I just thought, I just want to not think about the repertoire anymore.
Mhm.
I'd had quite a long career with Alive and singing on my own and writing songs and then when I met Bobby McFerrin, that was so timely, so beautiful, because he was a complete improviser, and our concerts were completely improvised, and I got a chance to improvise in front of thousands of people and learn how to hold my center while I did that. So I feel like I've been guided every step of the way by the angels and by all the beautiful musicians and by my parents, but really I feel like guidance all
Mhm.
the way to get me out of South Dakota to where I am.
Well, and I was really, as I was reading that Hotwire interview that talked about your migration, and I went, wow. I mean, you were in New York for a period, Long Island, and then to the Bay as well, and Chicago.
Mhm.
So you've hit like the some of most of the great art 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 driven centers.
Yeah, the Art Ensemble of Chicago. Oh yeah. New York, when you could go to jazz clubs for $5. So I went to hear live music most nights of the week. In San Francisco, Keystone Corner in the Great American Music Hall, I would go every night. I would ride my bicycle, go to the gig, and then sing all the way home.
Hmm.
I mean, I couldn't go to school to study jazz. It was a little too early for the conservatories to be offering jazz classes.
Hmm.
So my conservatory was really live music.
Wow.
That's where I studied. And I bought lots of albums and I hung out with people who listened. When they got together, they would listen to music. So I just was embedded with other artists. It was a beautiful way to study. I mean, I appreciate conservatories and the possibility of having a really curriculum
Hmm.
around music. But learning it live was really beautiful. And really, alive was like going to graduate school.
Well, there's such a convergence of influences and experiences, and that's what makes the sound so unique. I mean, we really still have not heard anything like that since, because you can't. You can't replicate the stew. It's only that way once.
No, it's really true. Uh, like, for example, that song City Life that's in there. I had learned it from a guy named Larry Kefauver. He was a jazz teacher of mine, and he was a writer, and he wrote a song called Gimme the Country because he wanted to get out of the city. And I listened to it, but it didn't have lyrics.
Okay.
It just was, it was kind of slow, but it was those ba dum ba dum ba blah 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 blah. It was that like bass line
Okay.
and piano part. So then when I wrote it, I was so happy living in the city. We speeded it up and we put in a whole lot of words, and it became this other piece. And I tried and tried to find Larry to give him
Wow.
credit and to offer him some money. And I think he went up into the Sierras. That was the last I knew.
Wow.
But it was really his inspiration. So
Wow.
that's how, I mean, often songwriting is that way. You get a glimmer from somebody and then you mess with it. And
Yes. What on that level, like I really want to talk about Spirit Healer as well, which has been feels in 2020.
it's
Uh,
still in my repertoire. Yeah.
it feels so timely in this moment. I just want to read a little bit of the lyrics so people that maybe haven't heard it can. And you can find this on all of the digital music stores on a compilation called Always Alive. And this song is called Spirit Healer, written by Carolyn Brandy. In the rape of this land, many people have suffered. Oh, where is the spirit healer? At the hands of a madness, the earth is imprisoned. Oh, where is the spirit healer? The children are crying. They can't get enough love. All over this town, there are people going hungry. Won't you look at yourself through the eyes of this sadness? Don't you think it's time for some changing? Woman, don't you know you've got to change it? Don't you know you're the spirit healer?
Yeah.
There's a woman next to you who's got next to nothing. Oh,
Oh,
where is the spirit healer?
where is the spirit healer? At the end of the line, she's so tired and lonely. Where is the spirit healer? Doesn't seem right. It's so hard to get over. But all these moments of suffering, they just remind us to love, to look straight ahead. Only seems to be natural. But there are times when I feel like I'm dying instead. Woman, don't you know you got to change it? Don't you know you are the spirit healer? You know, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez is all over Facebook today with that speech she made to the
Yes.
Yoo-hoo, whatever his name was, who spoke so badly to her. And as I was singing those words, I thought, well, there she is. That's the
Mm,
next generation of spirit healer.
yes. What were, for people that weren't around then or that were kids then, what were some of the conditions at the time that aren't quite that unlike this time, but at the time, what were some of the things happening?
Well, first, let me say that when Carolyn wrote that song, she was very, 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 very shy about bringing it to us because we were a jazz ensemble. And she didn't think it was good enough, strong enough. And as soon as we heard it, we all, we just grabbed it and loved it. So I want to honor Carolyn for writing such a universal kind of song.
Yes.
Uh, well, Jenny and I just watched this documentary episodes about Bobby Kennedy. And so we had four assassinations. Malcolm X, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Bobby Kennedy. We had the Vietnam War. We had the Black Power movement. We had the women's movement. We had AIDS. There was so much convergence of
Yes.
movements and difficulties and then all the riots in the cities with people so angry and wanting so much to make things right. And it just feels like we're living through it again, but on some deeper level. So maybe this time we can pick up some of the pieces we didn't quite get to. But it was a tremendous time to be alive. It was really shocking. It's like now. Every day you open the newspaper and think like, oh my God, we did not have a pandemic at the time. But the Vietnam War was just all over everybody's skin
Right.
and all the other movements. And then to have the beautiful leaders killed one after another so that it was very difficult for leadership to progress. It's
Yes.
just devastating times. So the women's movement really came out of all that. And
Yes.
I think it was women's response to all that was going on, but we needed it to be from our point of view. It was no longer possible for us to sing songs written for us by men. And we wanted to produce them in the studio ourselves. We wanted to have the lighting technicians be women. We wanted the sound women. We wanted the whole thing because we knew we needed all those skills. I think what people recognized in that time is you have to get independent. You
Hmm.
have to be able to manage your life in a free kind of a way. You cannot be waiting for somebody to fix it for you.
Right. Right. Whether
And
that's
we've got that
definitely.
now. By and large, the leadership of the country, except for some of these extraordinary people who are in the Congress, I can't imagine how they get up and go into work, but they're there. But a lot of our leadership is just horrific. So we cannot count on them. It's going to need to come from the ground up. Portland being one of those places, Minneapolis, that are just producing leadership.
That's right.
And it's shared leadership. I would say if the most important thing I learned in the women's movement, shared leadership. If somebody tries to lead it alone, it's just not going to have as broad an understanding. And then you have to figure out how not to end up in a mess because you're all talking at the same time. But shared leadership is critical. Don't you feel like you learned that too?
Totally. I mean, I think the thing that made, particularly the women's movement, because I think to me that's the place we see it the most demonstrated, is that you get all of the colors. You get this broader view of the way the world is experienced and is in different places for different people because everyone's coming to the table.
Yeah. And I would say the women and nature. The first time I went to the Women's Festival in Michigan, and it was actually on land out in the country where we had to build all the structures that made the festival work. That was a tremendous connection for women, and and all of nature.
Yes.
So a lot of the music then began to reflect the fact that we were out there together
Yes.
for a whole week. Some of the women stayed out there all summer building all the parts of the
Right.
festival. I think what we understand now about transgender people makes us understand a bigger picture, and that's really critical. But I would say, especially in those early years in Michigan, it was it was like a revelation to the 10th power to be on
Yes.
land where there were only women,
Yes.
and 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 we did everything, and we managed the weather, and we made music, and we made art, and uh, I feel like that experience got a lot of us to grow up. Alive played there many years.
Right.
I played there by myself many years, and it was a way to grow up as a woman and as a citizen and as a human being related to nature, where nature played a big part in those festivals.
And like you said, then in the music, I mean, it is
Yeah,
complete. You get that on this album. You get
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. How has, and then this isn't necessarily about the album, but it is about the changes since that time.
Mhm.
How has the absence of those kinds of avenues for creatives um, changed the ways that community is developed?
Yeah, there's no replacing it. There is no other Michigan.
Right.
The national still goes on. There are smaller festivals that still go on and are working in all kinds of ways. Uh, Michigan was, it was the homeland.
Mhm.
And uh, 40 years, 40 years. So it needed to go other directions, and that is what it's doing. Like Carolyn Brandy has a women's drumming camp that happens in the Bay Area with women drummers from all over the world, hand drummers, who come, and that's incredible. There are other festivals that have sprung up. I feel like Michigan did. The land is still owned by women.
Right.
There are small things happening there, and that's probably fine for now. I am deeply grateful to have been there. And I just want to say that all the issues around transgender people and women of color and um, uh, music appropriation from other cultures, those really important issues got talked about more than anyone from the outside could know.
Mhm.
They were discussed with such intelligence and such passion, and they were really hard in certain cases to figure out. But a lot of that did get figured out there. And I think when it came to the point where there was so much hurt, and God bless Lisa Vogel,
Mhm.
and God bless all the trans people who were trying to find their way to the next step. There's not somebody wrong in this. There was a terrible disconnect of how to go forward, how
Yeah.
to make this work in a bigger way. And uh, I suppose I'm upsetting somebody saying it in this way. There's probably no way not to upset somebody, but uh, I just feel like it was a tremendous opportunity to be there, and
Mm.
that it had a kind of closure. It was
Yes.
a god darn beautiful last year.
It looked amazing from the outside to see
Yeah,
the.
and now other things are taking the place, and we go on. We learn new things, we open our minds wider. I think if there anything we're learning now is that taking sides is really dangerous.
Mm.
It's just it's just opposing, boing, boing, and there's there are other ways, and they're not easy to find. They're very difficult. I don't know how to talk to Trump supporters. I don't know how to do it. But I know that in the end, we're on this one planet together. And there has to be something that we find in common so that we can continue living on the planet.
Well, and I think one of the things that we have, just people in general, maybe lost in many ways, is the ability to have a conversation that has nuance, that's complex, that isn't sided, that is multifaceted.
Mhm.
And we find ways in particular scenarios to work through things together. And I think that's really where we have to find our way as people in the world, as creatives, as healers,
Mhm.
as, you know, just person to person in relationship. Not every people are, I think we've lost the ability to be human.
We better find it again.
We better find it again.
Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think, again, I want to point people to this album because if you want to hear embodiment, and you want to hear connection between people, and you want to hear mystery and complexity and simplicity and beauty and introspection. The Women of Alive did that. And this
Thank you.
album really, really speaks. I mean, if Spirit Healer alone doesn't draw somebody in, I don't know what else to point them to. But I think that you will learn something in listening to this music and find a piece of yourself. I want to read something. Barbara Borden from Alive just sent this in. I'm sorry, I'm holding it back. It's not because I'm unfamiliar with Barbara's name, I just can't see. Happy to be with you both, Tim and Rhiannon. Such a great interviewer and interviewee. Makes me homesick for Alive and all that was happening in those days. And here we are now, most of us still alive. Janet Small is saving us a place in jazz heaven. Carry
Oh,
on with the spiritual and revolutionary power of music.
oh, beautiful.
Love.
Thank you, Barbara.
And Barbara, I'm going to have Barbara on too to talk about.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
because these stories, Rhiannon, really have to get. There's so many facets to the stories.
Well, speaking of facets, I feel like I need to say Barbara Price's name, who was also very, very critical in the early years of the Michigan Festival. Uh, just so many women that made these events happen, and uh, I hope that we always can see the way to remembering the parts that made it so vibrant, so important. One year when Barbara Price was still there, Barbara and Lisa were running the festival together. I brought with me. I said I want to bring a trapeze artist. I'll sing, and she's going to be on the trapeze. And I have a bassoon player. What do you think? And Barbara said, sure. So they built a freestanding trapeze, double layered. My layer, I sat still. The top layer was a woman from Bolinas, California, who swung out over the audience while I recited a Rumi poem. I sang it, and she flew out over the audience, and they put it up and took it down in between sets.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
those were the kind of things that happened there that helped us all grow because we could bring ideas to them and say, "I want to do this. I'm going to need this," and they'd say, "Okay, let's try."
Wow.
And may it be so that from here on in, when we move through this revolution, that we find the next step of making things dramatically,
Yeah.
passionately
Yeah.
creative, because we're still here wanting it, right?
And I keep saying every time we have these conversations, which I'm sure like you, we're having every day with somebody at some point. And I just keep saying the only hope I can really hold on to is that on the other side of this, if we keep doing our work in this moment, we're going to have a great renaissance on the
Yeah.
other side of this. I have to believe that.
And I am sure that women are going to lead the way.
Absolutely.
I feel like that is what Alexandria is showing. That's why we're going to have a female vice president.
That's right.
It's not that men go away, it's that we stop being two sides.
Really not as hard as we're making it.
No.
It's really not. Well, and again, I just really want to point anyone who's listening to women's music, because what you get in this music is a model for a different way of being in the world, a different way of perceiving the world, a different way of operating in the world. And I will forever be grateful. I get emotional when I talk about it. The music means so much to me because it's shown, it's pushed up for me another way of being, which is so important. If we're going to move forward, we have to be in this world differently.
I want to thank you so much, Tim. Your commitment to this is unique and extraordinary. And we all know it.
Well,
You,
thank you
you
for
have
that.
really been in there in a very, very special way. You are seen. I want you to know that
Thank you.
and appreciated deeply.
Well, I want to send people, if you're watching either here or you're watching the replay later on YouTube, please go to rhiannonmusic.com and stop by and pick up Vocal River. You will not regret it. And you can download all of Rhiannon's albums, I think, except for one, Live at Tamales Bay, which is exquisite. I hope it comes out again one day.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Awesome. But download Rhiannon's music in the digital stores and pick up Vocal River, download Always Alive. This music will get inside and transform you, which is what good music does. So rhiannonmusic.com. And if you get a chance to take a class with Rhiannon,
Yeah,
do.
I'm teaching online now, and so people don't have to fly to Hawaii. You can just plug into Zoom.
Can they get in touch with you through the website
Yes,
to? Okay,
absolutely.
awesome. So I really, really hope people do that because Rhiannon is such a leader and such a voice in our time. You're the one and only. There's only one you, and you're
Right back to
special.
you, Tim. Thank you so much. Thank you for this way of doing these interviews. Really, really beautiful.
Well, thank you for tonight. We will be back on August 6th with my friend Kathleen Mandeville, who was a women's music producer back in the day.
Yay!
Um, and she still produces incredible, extravagant events. You two should definitely connect. I can see her
Yeah.
probably doing something with the trapeze. Um, we're going to be talking about Jade and Sarsaparilla on August 6th. Again, a group you may not know, but
Mhm.
you should. You can get this album on Amoeba and Amoeba Music today digitally. And then on August 20th, I did not bring her album cover out, but I will next week. We'll be talking about Lolita Holloway. So Tom Eubanks, the author of The Ghosts of St. Vincent. So we're going to have some fun conversations over the next month. So I hope you'll join us again. Rhiannon, I thank you. Any final words for anyone?
Love is all there is. Love and music.
Right. Well, I love you with all my heart,
I do love you too, Tim.
and
Mwah.
we'll talk soon.
Gorgeous.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me for this week's Have You Ever Heard? I'd love it if you leave us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. Until then, I hope you enjoy the tunes.